How does persuasion works? Well, first we need to understand that there are two main mechanisms by which people process the information given to them in messages. So we have two theories that talk about this, the heuristic semantic model and the elaboration livelihood model. We're going to focus on this one. The two mechanisms that this theory states are the peripheral and central routes. The peripheral processing involves more simple cues, relevance, reputation, consistency, and more, while the central route is more about the examination of the information and arguments given and the relationship to the personal knowledge and bias. So what determines which route are individuals taking? Well, motivation, which is influenced by the level of involvement they have and the ability. Also, the need for cognition. So these tools, even though they can be subjective, are great to establish the strategy that persuaders will use.
So the underlying theory behind this text is the existence of a mediation between the message and its effect. This is called the psychological process. The idea is that different characteristics of audience will lead to different psychological process and thus to different effects. In the text, we can find several audience-related variables that will lead the audience to take the peripheral or the central route. So there is the idea of the interest in acquiring information or motivation, and the selective perception or the self-validation hypothesis. So as Katz would say, the attitudes and the predisposition of the audience are variables between the message and the audience. So there are also message-related factors such as source credibility and order of the arguments. So Perloff arrives to the same conclusion as the Yale model, is to say that if you want to persuade, you have to adapt your message to the characteristics of your audience, which according to Pariser is done, for example, through the filter bubble.
Imagine the Spanish Ministry of Health as a campaign to promote exercise and uses Rafael Nadal to do so. Depending on the personal circumstances, processing could take two routes.
A fitness enthusiast trying to lose weight will probably use the central processing model, because he's already knowledgeable about the topic, is interested in the topic, and it's personally relevant to them. And the beliefs in the campaign are likely to already be closer to his own. So he will evaluate the scientific arguments made in the campaign and use that to evaluate the message. However, this is probably not the target audience that the ministry is trying to reach. The target audience of the campaign are people who are not knowledgeable about fitness and its benefits. That audience will probably use peripheral processing and base their evaluations on Rafael Nadal being present in the campaign, the amount of arguments made, and the fact that the source is the Ministry of Health to determine whether they are persuaded or not by the message.
So the ministry should carefully construct their message and think about how the audience will process the information.
Let's take a look at how we can use the theory from this text to understand a current issue in the world, the USA elections, for example. We can see some different factors that determine someone's motivation to elaborate in these campaigns. For example, Taylor Swift endorsing Kamala Harris can be seen as a credibility source. Her post has motivated more than 400,000 people to visit the voters' registration website. Swift's fanbase consists of a relatively young audience who are in the population of people who do not generally vote. Thus, her post has motivated them to elaborate about the election and change their behavior. Moving on, youth involvement related factors also play a big role in these elections. Kamala Harris, for example, talks about immigrants' rights, and Trump talks about anti-immigration. There are many people who will either connect with one or the other and thus elaborate with either one or the other. So all in all, the theory that we have read this week is still very relevant and can be recognized in many contemporary examples in the current world.